Hey there, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking all about how to hack your brain with the BrainTap. And this is my personal one I've been using for the last month. I'm very, very impressed with it and pleased with the benefits that I've been getting. I came into this whole thing very skeptical of it. In fact, I've seen this device around for at least 2 or 3 years and didn't try it because I was so skeptical of it. I basically thought the whole thing was BS. And then several months ago, I had a friend who had one who was raving about it. And it's a friend who I trust and respect and has a lot of scientific expertise. And he let me try his out. And I was like, okay, I'll try out your little BS device here. And I tried it and I was immediately blown away by the benefits. I mean, the state of physiological relaxation was impossible to deny. So it wasn't just placebo effect, because I went into it thinking that it was nonsense, not thinking that, oh my gosh, this thing's going to be so amazing. It's going to have all these benefits. So I came into this a few months ago as a skeptic. Now I'm a believer. And I even reached out to the founder of BrainTap, Dr. Patrick Porter, to have him on the podcast. And that's what this episode is all about. We're going to be talking about how this technology works, what it's designed to do, and what the benefits are. So a little bit about Dr. Porter. He is an award-winning author and speaker and the founder of BrainTap, which is the leader in technology-enhanced meditation. He pioneered the use of brainwave entrainment to improve clarity, sleep, and energy, and he remains at the forefront of scientific research in this field. He founded BrainTap with the goal of making this technology accessible to everyone. BrainTap offers over 1,800 original audio sessions in 12 languages and serves a worldwide user base with its mobile app and headset. Dr. Porter has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, People Magazine, Entrepreneur, Inc., and on ABC, NBC, CBS as an expert in brain health and wellness. And in 2020, he received the IAFNR Lifetime Achievement Award. So without any further ado, we will get into the podcast now. One thing I do want to mention, he generously offered a discount on the BrainTap headset. And you can get that at theenergyblueprint.com/BrainTap. We'll have a link or a discount code or something there to help you guys get a discount on this, which will give you a cheaper price than I paid for it a month ago. So enjoy that and enjoy the episode. I think you're going to get a lot of value from this. All right. So welcome to the show, Dr. Porter. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Hey, it's great being here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So first of all, I would love for you to talk a bit about how you got into this area of brain tapping, of brain hacking, of brain entrainment. How did this all come about?
Well, I've been doing it actually my whole life. When I was younger, my dad found help in something called the Silva method, and he became a Silva instructor. So we were using something called the Silva noise or Silva sound, however they would say it back then. I found out later that was isochronic tones. And you'd play that in the seminar room. And of course, I grew up going with my dad to do these seminars at least twice a month. And so just over and over again. And then when I got out of school, I was not going to do what my dad did. There's no way, you don't do that. So I went to school for electronics. But all the time I was going to school for electronics, I still kept helping with the seminars. And when I got to be about 23, he started saying, hey, you want to do a little bit of the seminar? So I started teaching and I started liking it. And I went, wow, I didn't think I would like it, but getting up in front of people and, having a conversation. And Silva was pretty easy. They had certain things you had to do. And so we split off from that. My dad still was the instructor, but we did some other things. But what happened to me was I got involved with a group called Light and Sound Research, and just things fell into place. It's a long story. I don't want to tell it here, but it was like one of those divine meetings between myself and the group, and everything, the stars aligned, and they needed help with electronics. And I loved meditation, and they didn't know how to get this thing to work. So it was in my office in Scottsdale, Arizona, when I was I think I was 24 years old. And we started building these things out of our back office and playing with them, and never in thinking that it would go as big as it is, because that wasn't part of the vision. It was just to help my immediate clients. And then, we're off to the races. I did we couldn't sell these. We actually got an award in 1989 as the best new gadget at CES show. But if you can imagine landing with a piece of technology that's like from the future, because there was no cell phones, there was no CDs, there was no downloads, none of these things. And here we are training people's brains to go into alpha and theta. And I remember we were on the cover of the Consumer Electronics Show, and we had 6 chairs, and the Rolling Stones were playing behind us. And the cover just said something about technology-driven meditation. And it looked like they were assassinated because they're all laying there passed out. But we sold. What happened was we realized that these weren't products at that time that we could sell through the big box stores. So that's when I started a franchise company. I ran that for 20 years, and we're very successful. I sold that in 2002, and kind of semi-retired. Just got there speaking and doing things, and then when that ended, because the company that I sold it to, they ran it for 12 years, and then they didn't have the same philosophy I did. I have a philosophy of helping people and making money. They had a philosophy of making money, and if people got help, that was okay. It's a little bit different philosophy. So yeah. I basically got all my materials back in 2000, and it was like 2012. So when I was living in the Bay Area, San Francisco at the time, and of course you have access to a lot of high-end engineers, and I wasn't in the field anymore. So I hired some people, we got together, and I created the first BrainTap, which is where we put everything into a headset. Before that, it was like 4 different pieces. It was like one of the modular stereo systems where you had to put it all together, and it was a lot more cumbersome. Nobody liked to use it. But when we came out with that, we knew we had something there. And so that's really how it happened. And I'm always an experimenter, a tinkerer, and I'm always looking for results. Even with my my franchise company, was called Positive Changes. And our slogan was, I know you want to ask, do we get results? Because everybody's so skeptical about self-help, because obviously it's self-help. You're supposed to be helping yourself, but the problem is that people don't know what to do or how to do it. So in my case, in my first book, Awaken the Genius, I wrote about myself because I was one of those kids that needed help. In 2nd grade, I got held back, and I realized by the time I was in 7th and 8th grade, I was an honor roll student. I was considered super smart. I have no idea what happened, but it was a combination of meditation and reading a book called As a Man Thinketh, which is just a little tiny book by James Allen. I still carry it with me whenever I start. We're all subject to negative thinking every once in a while. As soon as something happens that I'm going, hey, I'm using my mind, everything's supposed to be working super great, but that's not the way life works. So you got to remind yourself of some of these core principles, that something in my thinking was off, to bring that piece of information to me in my world.
Okay. So, I think maybe this is a good time to mention, I have one of these BrainTaps myself. I actually went out and bought it about a month ago. I've seen it around for a couple years, and I've been skeptical of it. And to be frank, I kind of thought it was BS. And I said, yeah, I really want to see some solid science on this thing before I'm ready to believe in it, before I'm ready to endorse it, before I'm ready to do a podcast like this. And I want to try it out personally. And I had a friend, a good friend, a mutual friend of ours named Roland, who came and visited me, and he was raving about it, and he let me try it. And I said, yeah, all right, I'll indulge you in this little BS. And I tried it, and it was very clear to me that it induced a very powerful state of physiological relaxation. And I could feel my nervous system calm down very profoundly in just about 15 minutes of doing this. And that's when I went, okay, I'm ready to take a more serious look at this thing. And then I went on your website and saw some of the research that you guys have conducted, or other parties have conducted on the device. And some of that research is quite impressive. And I've been using it and enjoying it. So then at that point, I said, okay, can you connect me with Dr. Porter? I'd like to do this podcast at that point. So for people who have no understanding of this field, they don't know what brain entrainment is. They don't know what isochronic tones are, binaural beats. They don't know alpha, theta, delta, all these kinds of things. Give me a rundown first of, I guess, the different brain waves and what they're associated with, why it would be valuable for someone to want to entrain their brain into a particular brainwave state.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to be skeptical of things like this because it just seems there's a saying, spirit is simple, but man is complex. So they want it to be a lot more difficult. But there's 5 primary brain waves that I'll talk about. I might mention a 6th one. They actually break them down into more than 16, but we're not going to go through all of them because they're not in textbooks typically. Where we're talking right now is primarily a beta state of consciousness, but all brain waves should be happening at the same time. It's just the amount of brainwave activity. And think of brainwaves kind of like Wi-Fi networks. They're telling, but they're healthy. They're telling the body what to do. So I'm going to explain what the brainwaves are, what their main responsibility, and one of the main instruction sets that's going on with the body. So in beta, this is our reactionary mind. It's also tied to dopamine production. So when we think about most of the negative things that people are, going for, like drugs, alcohol, whatever, pornography, all these things, those are dopamine. And the beta brain is an adjutant. So dopamine's an adjutant. So it gets you to take action. You get to feel something. So especially if people are feeling numb, they don't feel anything, they'll go out and do something, like they'll do a drug, or they'll do a skydiving. They'll do something to get their body to feel something. Now, that should only be about 45% of our waking brain state. Because if we're just reacting all the time, and this is where we're at right now in our world, most people have a disproportionate amount of beta activity going on. So they create what's called sympathetic drive or sympathetic overload or sympathetic lock. It's been called a lot of different things. Just think about it like you basically got the gas pedal on, you're going like crazy and you don't know where the brake is, and so you get anxiety, stress disorders. So then, but if we drop down one, there's a state called alpha. They consider alpha the neutral of the brain. So if you think about alpha, the planet itself actually has a frequency below this. But most people, when they meditate, this is where they're going. They're going to alpha because at neutral, 10 hertz frequency, which is 10 cycles per second, almost all of our electricity is 10 hertz frequency. It's running through our homes and all of this. And that's because they found it was the safest. People stayed sane. If it was something different than that, we wouldn't be able to handle that electricity going through our homes. And not that it's all good for us, but that brainwave should be about 30%. And it has to do with our intuition. So this intuitive part, and this is why the reason we need about 30% of that is it really activates a part of our brain called the hippocampus. This is the part of our brain that takes short-term memories and makes long-term memories. It's also the part that goes and grabs our long-term memories and gives us short-term information. So we can basically learn our lessons from life, play it back through us, and we get these responses. So that's our primary brainwave state when we're awake. But alpha also triggers acetylcholine, which is the feelings of being in love. That's just one of the neurotransmitters. But just think about our world. When we go into a big city like LA or New York or San Francisco, and you're hearing the honking and the busy, that's a beta state. That's why some people feel so anxious and, especially if they lived in the country or they're used to being, away from all that. Alpha, though, if in the same thing, if you've ever seen, like my wife used to work for the Phoenix Symphony. So we'd go to listen to the symphony and half the crowd sleeping for $200 a night, because they're not used to being in alpha, because that music actually is something called the Mozart effect. They've proven that listening to that music makes you smarter, but that's because it integrates more alpha. That means your recall system. Every person on earth has a perfect memory. It's the recall system that's in trouble. That because they know that from, like, if we did a neurosurgery on somebody who could touch their brain in certain areas, they would have a full sensory memory of even the most mundane thing in their life, because the brain chemically codes every memory, every experience. In fact, more than you think your eyes are actually processing over 2,000 pieces of information every second. Your ears, 25,000 pieces of information every second, but we filter it out. So it's not important to us. We don't listen to it. And maybe we'll get more into that a little bit later. We drop down a little bit below that. There's a state called theta. Theta, we call the inventive mind. This is because most inventors would have a strategy. If they had a problem in their lab, they would go to sleep, they'd wake up, the solution would pop into their mind. And this is something a lot of self-help gurus have used in recent times to, like, problem solving. You know, you write a piece on a piece of paper before you go to bed, you have a problem, you put it under your pillow, you wake up, the solution comes to mind. That's because you've triggered your subconscious. You've triggered that part of your brain. And this part of the awakened state of humans right now on Earth, this is the brainwave that's most critical because we don't have it. Most people have very little theta activity. Now, theta is also the brainwave that triggers GABA production. GABA production is really important because it's a precursor to DMT, and we have DMT in every cell. So if we want to have dreams and we want to problem solve and we want to create a new life, we have to have this chemical in our brain. If not, this what's called neural pruning happens, meaning that the more we're in a fight or flight, the more our brain shuts off neural connections. It doesn't want choices. It simply wants you to get the heck out of there. But if we're in an expanded state of consciousness like alpha and theta, then our brain has to start to create that neuroplasticity or energy in the brain. Really, that's what we're measuring, is how much energy does your brain have. So that's really important.
And say that again. In what way is it measuring? How much energy does your brain have?
You can measure across the brain the ATP production in the brain. We do it with two different devices. We have one called the NeuroCheck that I helped to create, and then there's one called the WAVI, which is a QEEG. But almost every QEEG does it because what it's measuring is electrical stimulus, but it's very low level. You know, like our heart has a frequency that can be up to 18 feet away from us, but our brain, we have to put the probes right on our head, you know, so that we can get those senses. But the more energy we have in the body, the more it reads. So like if the brain they can't measure every neuron connection. That would be, right now, that'd be impossible for us. But what they can measure is how much energy is there. And then using an algorithm, they can say, well, if there's, like, say, across the frontal lobes, if you have matched pair of 10.1 across the frontal lobes, you're probably thinking really good. But if they're off even one, like if one's at 10.1 and one's at 10, you're going to start to develop Alzheimer's, dementia, and things like that, because these two energies have to match all the time. The brain has to match. If it's not, then that's when anxiety and stress come about. Now, that energy they're measuring can also, depending upon the amplitude of that energy, will tell us how much neuroplasticity they have, which means how can the brain change? It has to have energy to change. Just like if you were exercising and you had no energy, you can't exercise. The brain is the same thing. That's why we call it brain fitness now. So we want to get more energy. And we'll talk a little bit why we chose what we chose to bring energy directly to the brain, because we can bypass the digestive tract and bring energy right into the brain. That's what we did. So delta is the one that most people want because 2/3 of the world isn't sleeping right now. And that's because of a lot of different things, and depending upon your philosophies and reality that you're looking at. If you're looking at mainstream media or the real news, you know, you're going to have different ideas about what's happening out there. But delta, if you don't get deep delta, then what's happening is you're not detoxifying your brain. Before 2015, every neurophysiology book, every physiology book in the world, the lymphatic system stopped at the neck, which is virtually impossible, because if you went to medical school or even to physiology class, you learn that wherever there's a blood vessel, there's a lymphatic vessel. But for some reason, the medical community up before 2015, before the March issue of American Scientific, when they released it out to the world, they didn't believe we had a lymphatic system in our brain.
Well, because they couldn't find the lymph vessels.
Yeah, because it didn't turn on until they were in level 4 sleep. Once the brain is in level 4 sleep, then this system comes on. Most people have experienced what's called sleep paralysis. When you're experiencing sleep paralysis, that's when the glial lymphomic system is open. Because it's kind of like, you're not going to work on the line in the Ford Motor Company if everybody's working on it. You're going to shut down the line. They're going to do the cleaning. The same is true with the brain. But most people get scared about that. And that's just a natural, most people don't wake up, but they just, this freaky feeling that they can't wake up. But when that happens, at delta, if we don't get those deep level 4 sleep, and that's what, like the Aura Ring or different pieces of equipment they have out there, we want to measure our sleep, because if you're not getting a combined 45 to an hour's worth of deep sleep, you're probably not going to score too well on a sleep meter. And they know that because basically when they're reading those rhythms, they know that every time you dip into that level 4 sleep, your body basically has micro burst of this, glial lymphomic system lights up and does its work. And it doesn't just open up and does it forever, just really short, but if it does it correctly, then we clean out the brain. And every night when we sleep, if we're getting that deep sleep, our brain will literally shrink 3/4 of an inch every night. But when we wake up in the morning, we have our glasses, a couple glasses of water, we have some mineral salt, we're rehydrating our brain. That's what, if you don't do that, if you just have coffee first thing in the morning, that's not really good for the brain, because coffee is a dehydrating substance too. Not that I'm against coffee, I like coffee myself, but you want to have enough water. So delta is really important, because delta is when the rest, recovery, digest system of the body gets kinked on. What I find in sports, whether it's we're talking about professional sports or we're talking about in Roland, who you're talking about, we're doing a professional sports study. The biggest thing that we show, like with Kansas City Sport and others professional teams, is if you work on your recovery, you will get better gains from everything you've done. Mm-hmm. But if you don't work on your recovery, there's no growth. If you just stress through the recovery, like a lot of people go to the gym, they work out really hard, then they leave, and then they just hit the stress and they're going, I'm not getting any gains at the gym. Well, that's because you're not giving your muscles, and especially the brain, time. And I actually wrote a whole thing about this in Ironman magazine, where I talked about acetylcholine at the mind-muscle connection. And we have a whole program about that, about building muscle with your mind, because you have the greatest pharmacy between your ears. It's not, you don't have to inject yourself with something, because your brain triggers all those neurochemicals. So in Arnold Schwarzenegger actually started in the 70s when he was talking about using visualization. And they now know that when you're visualizing, you create more acetylcholine because you're an alpha. So when you're weightlifting, if you can be more relaxed, you're actually going to get better gains than when you're stressed out screaming at each other, like some people do in the gym. Now, the other brainwave that's the new kid on the block that's getting a lot of notoriety right now is called gamma. And this is what I'm really excited about, because we've done several studies with this, with psychedelics, actually, with psilocybin and DMT and things of that nature. And what we're able to do is we're actually able to trigger those without the use of the substance. So especially if somebody's already been there, if somebody's already been there and they've mapped those things in their brain, they have an experience. And now we can, just like cannabinoid receptors in our brain, we have, the only reason that those give us our trips is because they're natural to our body. There's some kind of receptors in our brain. So with gamma also, we find the main thing that it triggers is high levels of GABA, again, the DMT experience. And when these monks are meditating in gamma and they're melting snow around them, that's because we know when you get into the heightened states of gamma and you get in the lower states of theta, when you get to delta, it kind of shifts again. But if you can stay in theta, which is a very small brainwave pattern between 4 and 7 hertz, your body actually starts to collect energy. It's a really weird phenomenon. When you go across 10 hertz frequency and you go across 7.8 hertz frequency, you get this massive gamma burst in your brain and you get a massive delta burst. It's almost like across the spectrum of consciousness, you get this energy expansion. And the reason that you want to be working on all of these, they all have something specific to do. Like we used to think gamma was like schizophrenics and people like that. But now now we have tools that can measure it. Number one, but before that, we just thought we didn't know how to measure it, so it wasn't useful. Just like Muse, which is a really nice little piece of technology, but they remove theta from their equation because most people can't get to theta. And this always blows me away when I'm reading people's things online where they're saying they're going to theta when they meditate. I've measured about 30,000 brains in the last 10 years, and even gurus that I've measured in India at Ames Bhopal, they weren't able to get to theta for very much of the time. But we have people here in America that meditate every once in a while and they think they're going to theta. What they're doing is they're going to deep alpha, which is still really good. But theta is a power. It's like the energy your body generates. If you've ever been around somebody that they just basically have healing energy around them. And there are certain people that do, I've scanned while they were doing like Reiki, which I used to think was like total craziness. You know, you're going to bring energy in, but they do. And now I guess I should tell this story so the listeners know where I'm getting from. But most people know who Tom Brady is, right? The football player.
Mhm.
He has clothing called TB12. That clothing is called recovery wear. That was actually designed by my science officer, Francisco Cedral,
Mhm.
because every person, every living thing, and inert things do too, but living things emit energy. You and I are emitting infrared light right now between the frequencies of 810 and 860 nanometer light. Now, some people, they've actually done experiments that when somebody's doing like these healing things, they can measure the photic energy from their heart. When somebody's in a state of gratitude and love, they actually broadcast 200 times more light. Well, what Francisco did, not that Tom Brady's in a state of perpetual love and bliss, but we all generate this energy. We all know, especially in the biohacking world or in the world of wellness, 810 nanometer light is really healing. So the clothing has ceramics in it. I sleep in my shirt every night. It doesn't say TB12 because I got the one that's just Francisco's. But our body is always transmitting that light. So if we don't have, the more we know, the more of this balance of brain waves, the more light. Now, what does that mean? That you're not being a sponge for everything that's happening. You're actually pushing your light out, which means now you're in more control of your own health and vitality and things of that nature. When you think about what's going on with the body, back in 2003, when they mapped the human genome, you probably remember that, or you heard about it. The reality is they only map 1% of it. Well, 1% doesn't mean you map the human genome. I mean, I don't even know why they could get in the news about that. If I only got one question answered on my entrance exam into college, they wouldn't have let me in. But these scientists got all this glory. Well, the problem was the 99% they couldn't measure because it changes every 40 seconds. We now have the technology that tells us that epigenetic experience changes. Every gene pair changes every 40 seconds based on your environment, the people you talk with, the light you're exposed to, the water you drink, everything in your environment. Your body is literally showing up as your best self, or basically the default mode network shows up and you basically make it through it. So what we wanted to do with these brain waves is we know that when your body's in the right physiological state, now you can address the environment. You can address things like EMF don't bother you as much because now you have you're making your own weather, as I like to tell people, instead of letting somebody say, oh, EMF, and EMFs are bad, you know, but guess what? You can walk outside barefoot and they don't even touch you. You ground them right into the earth. So there is solutions, but a lot of people are out there yelling from the mountaintops how bad they are, but they're not telling you that there are solutions to these problems. And I think the biggest solution we have is that our brain has been manipulated. In fact, one of the documentaries I'm doing with a group called Red Pill Productions is Assault on the Brain, because we have been programmed since birth to think, act, and respond the way we think, act, and respond, and it's not serving us anymore. I mean, we can't just keep being consumers, you know, forever and think that the world's going to take care of us. There's got to be some balance there. And I think that we don't have enough downtime in our reality. It's all uptime. I mean, you know, we're Americans here, so we want it free, we want it fast, we want a limo to pick us up to get our winnings, and we don't want to pay anybody any taxes on that. You know, this is just what happens. And so, I mean, that's just it's kind of a philosophy. So I think these brain waves, each one, and we have sessions for every one of them. So we can measure somebody with a QEG, which is could be as much as 72 channel QEG, just depends on which one we're using. And we can say, hey, look you're missing alpha, you're missing theta, you're missing gamma. Now we can target that in the same way you might go to the gym and say, look, your legs are looking kind of weak. We need to get you doing more leg work, or we need to get you doing more arm work. You know, we can do that with the brain. And that's one of the big things about brain fitness. And then we can also find that there are nutrients. I believe that nutrition is the first step to wellness. You can't outthink a bad diet, you know, so you got to eat well, and then you've got to move and breathe. You know, people have to be moving and breathing, and then you have to do some kind of brain fitness, but they all have to be done. I think that's the order I would put them in. But I think if you don't do any one of those, you're missing out on the wellness equation. And that's really where we come in.
Okay, so I've got all the other aspects covered, but let's talk brain fitness. So in the BrainTap, you are using certain technologies to entrain these different brainwave states that you just talked about. What are those technologies that are being used?
Mhm. Well, we're going to use sound, light, and we're going to use vibration. So I'll break those down just so you understand. So we're going to use sound because that's right now, sound has been very well researched for hundreds of years. And we know we can put a binaural beat in, which means we can put a 300 hertz frequency in one ear and a 310 in the other. The brain hears neither one of those. It hears a phantom sound of 10 hertz. What we've done over the years, we started working with Murrow Institute back in the 80s. They're probably the world leader in brainwave entrainment, but they only do one thing. They're like a one-trick pony. They're going to teach you to project out of your body and do these astral projection things. So of course science looks at them and goes, okay, but I believe it's real. Like they did the Stargate program, and there's all this kind of stuff that's kind of fringe research now. But what they found out was when you get into these expanded states of consciousness, you start getting access to other realms of possibility, and some of them happen to be real. So, but what happens is when you're using just isochronic tones, you might not have perfect matched hearing. So we do isochronic tones. This is a mono frequency. So everyone who's listening to this has been exposed to isochronic tones. It's a waterfall, it's a mountain, it's the earth itself. If you and I were to fly to Earth on a spaceship and we were to evaluate Earth, it would resonate between 0.05 and 100, depending upon where you're at on the planet. So what happens is our body, every cell is vibrating with energy, and it's matching the energy in its surroundings all the time. So if we get bombarded with negative things like a negative smell or a negative radiation, whatever's going on, our cells will go into what's called the cell danger response. They'll basically start to snuff out our mitochondria. Now, what that's really doing is it's stuffing out our ability to change our epigenetics, because that mitochondria is the light that's telling our cells what to do. If we don't have that light broadcasting, then we have to go to the default mode network and we have to go to fight or flight. So when we're in these expanded states, so sound, if everything's good, we're going to have that. Now, what we've done is we also use that music that I talked about a little bit earlier so all that's layered in, and then we put frequencies in. Now, what frequencies are is we can broadcast certain tones into the brain, and if we put them in correctly, which we've done, we can actually activate different regions of the brain. So when somebody's going through our sessions, it's not like we have one session for, let's say, stress reduction. We have 13 because that's a 13-track training. You can start with number 1 and go to 13. By the time you get to 13, you're actually going to theta in less than 3 minutes. And we know 100% of the people are going to theta in less than 3 minutes. I can tell you every person, I've never seen it not work after 3 visits. So if somebody can use the equipment 3 times, their brain will learn the pattern, because we as our cells, our physiology is always matching its environment. This is what we did since the moment we were conceived. So just like mom, when we're in the womb, we're vibrating with energy and we're going to match her frequency. So if she gets mad and angry, we're going to feel that. We're going to feel that as an emotion, energy becoming motion in the body. So the sound is really important. But guess what happens when you close your eyes? You lose 30% of brain function. So when people meditate, what they don't understand is they just shut off 30% of their brain's power because nobody taught them how to meditate. They didn't teach them how to focus on the light. There is an inner light and there's an external light. But when you go to a guru and they teach you how to meditate, they don't just have you sit there and think your old thoughts that you had yesterday and the day before. They're going to give you new thoughts to think. They're going to give you new ways to, they're probably going to have you do some physical exercise to get your body ready for meditation. Most people think yoga is about physical fitness. Yoga was designed to get you to meditate. It wasn't designed for physical fitness. Tai Chi wasn't designed for physical fitness. It was designed to get your body ready for meditation. So, but nobody's doing that. They get done with their yoga, they roll up their mat, they jump in their car and they leave. And all that neuroplasticity is waiting to happen. And they just let it go away because stress happens and the brain collapses on it. So what we did, how do we keep the brain active? It's through sight. So how can we keep the rods and cones of the brain active and keep the brain awake? We're going to put what they call retinal flashing. Now, this was actually designed from ancient tradition, because just like sound, when you go to a drum circle or you go to doing chanting, all of those were designed to get the brain to synchronize. Even though we don't think about it that way, like when you're in a drum circle, after about 3 to 4 minutes, it becomes very synchronized and almost becomes a piece of music. But in the eyes, what we know, and everybody listening has probably had this experience. You've been at a concert or you've been at a church or a meeting, you couldn't hear the speaker. But as soon as you turned your attention and now you could see the speaker, now you could hear the speaker, that's because our primitive brain, those 25,000 pieces of information that we're processing, we weren't aware of until our eyes locked on to what we wanted to hear. And it happens also if we're in a restaurant, you and I are sitting there talking and somebody 2 tables over says, let me tell you how to get more energy, because your podcast is about energy. You go, hey, I just heard that energy, because that default network is always scanning for those, our buzzwords, in other words, what's on the top of our mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to use those same anchors with BrainTap. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a cortical response, which means a deep primitive brain. The brain stem is actually responding to these signals, not the conscious mind. The conscious mind has nothing to do with it. In fact, the conscious mind's a traveler. It only controls 5% of the show. What do I care what it thinks? Everybody's out there running around trying to change this 5% of their brain that doesn't control anything. Basically controls at the moment you get to make a decision. Do I want fries with that? That's about the biggest thing that the conscious mind does. The subconscious takes over and runs 95% of the show. So we need to start to train that part of our brain. So by using light frequency now, so in the eyes, we're going to use earth frequencies. These are low frequency brain frequencies that if I wanted alpha, I'm going to have to match some kind of 10 between 12 and 7 hertz frequency. That's going to be the frequency. But in our algorithm, it never stays the same. This is one of the problems people have when they go online to YouTube and somebody says, I got an isochronic tone generator and I made this great thing. Well, did you even hook it up to somebody with a QEEG and see if the brain's even moving? No, they didn't. They made it in their backyard or in their bedroom, and now they're a mystical being that has a degree in whatever brain. Somebody has that out there. I was really blown away. They go, they have a degree in brainwave encoding. I'm going, really? Somebody has that? I've never seen that, and I've been doing it since the 80s. There's very few people. There's probably a handful of us still alive, like Jeffrey Thompson, who's in your neighborhood there in San Diego. He's a master at it. I mean, we used to hire him when we first started. He's got some really good stuff. But what we did is we said, how can we match them? What's happening with binaurals? That's been around for a long time. There's no question. So I said, nobody was doing it with light. But in ancient traditions, what did they do to meditate? Every holy place has candles. Everybody puts candles on to relax. That's because a candle actually flickers at 10 hertz frequency. And our brain matches that 10 hertz. That's why if you've ever been in a romantic relationship and you're there and you have the fire going and everybody gets a little frisky and you get lucky, that's because you've produced acetylcholine. Your body, you made the environment, kind of like the set and setting they say when you're doing some kind of these these rituals that people have with plant-based medicine. You've got to have the right environment. That's because the body has to be in tune to get those right brain waves. So that's why when I do work with, we do work a thing called Choose Ketamine, where they send the BrainTap with them and they do ketamine with it. Or they do a psilocybin in these research projects, because some people, the fear will drive the process negative instead of getting them into a state of expanded state where they're open to having a more of a spiritual experience. And so what we did with light is we did that with the eyes. Now, up until 2014, we didn't have the ear lights. So when people look at it online and they say, why are there lights in the ears? Well, every cell of our body has something called a chromophore. That chromophore, kind of the best way to say it, is like a battery. And when you walk outside in the sunlight, those chromophores are being filled. And in fact, even in ancient traditions, like written about in the Vedas, they talked about if anybody had back 10,000 years ago, if you had a mental disturbance, anxiety, stress, depression, they would have you wake up 2 hours early and set outside for 2 hours. And the reason for that is there's more infrared light hitting the planet 2 hours before sunrise than any other time of the day. So how did they know that? Well, they know a lot of things we have no idea how they knew. We're reinventing what they knew in these ancient traditions. And so what we thought was, let's put the light in. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to match the light and frequency of sunrises and sunsets, because there's something to those experiences. There's a reason they're beautiful, obviously, but they're beautiful for a reason, because we're getting the right light that our body needs to encode. It's not just Superman that gets his energy from the sun. Every one of us does. Every day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, our temperature drops 2 degrees. This is telling us that these bodies were designed in the Serengeti. We're supposed to be taking a nap, but we don't. But if we do, that's where BrainTap comes in the middle of the afternoon to reboost your energy. Because what you really want is you want to recycle. You've got to get that uptick. And then in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock, the temperature increases. This is why people wake up around 2 to 3 in the evening at night when they're sleeping. But this is just one sign of what happens with the sequence. So if we can get the body back on its right time schedule with light, because we're inside houses, we're not outside like we used to be. Our body, we need to really, for lack of a better word, biohack. We need to create the environment that's going to have our body functioning in this experience that we're in, so it's not out of balance, but in tune with our environment. So that's where the lights come in. Now, those lights actually change every 2 minutes to a different frequency. And there's 7 frequencies called the Nogier frequencies. These frequencies, if they're all in tune, then your body will be healthy. So we know that every person, think about it like every time you do a BrainTap session, you're just tuning up your nervous system. You're taking it through like you would if you were a singer and you're going through the octaves and you're just making sure you can hit all those notes. That's what we're doing. We're just making sure the body can hit all those notes. You want to have nervous system flexibility. If you need to run pell-mell because somebody's chasing you, you can do it. If you need to stop running and just go to sleep, you should be able to turn it off and go to sleep. But what happens is, people ruminate and their thinking gets in the way. So we're using these technologies all together. And then what we did on top of that, now we have all of those things going on all at one time for different frequencies. So if somebody says, I don't want to hear anybody talking, that's fine. But guess what? Your best thinking brought you here. If we don't change the way you talk to yourself, the average person has 80,000 thoughts a day, 60,000 are negative. So, and that's not a bad thing. It's just genetic. When we're on the Serengeti running around, we didn't know if we were going to be lunch or we're getting lunch, so everything was a danger. Everything was a fear. All of that genetic memory is inside of us and it's driving our unconscious behaviors, but we can hack into it now. There's never been a time like today. We're getting super states of consciousness that were only available to people that would meditate 20, 30 years. And people are doing it in 2 or 3 sessions. Now they're there and it's like they go to this foreign land and they don't know what to do because they don't know. So that's why you got to go there. Well, I've been doing this since the 80s, and so, and I don't think I'm finished yet. We still have to, because life comes at us, but we need to prepare our body for that, to handle that stress, or that stress is going to handle us. And that's usually not a good thing because, for instance, those that are out there eating really good nutrition, and I agree. I love, we need that. I grew up in Battle Creek, Michigan. The first health food store in America was there. So I know what's going on. And the reality is that if you're stressed out, nervous, anxious, high beta, you're just eliminating all that out of the system because the parasympathetic isn't turned on.
Okay. So there's a lot to digest in what you just said. Let me have you succinctly summarize everything in terms of what is the BrainTap actually doing. So we're combining light, music, voice, vibration, and sound frequencies in these isochronic tones in order to entrain the brain into certain states with the goal of basically resetting, recharging, relaxing the nervous system. That's kind of how I would phrase it. How would you phrase it?
So, yeah. So what we're doing is, it's kind of like if you were in sports and you had to do practice, if you practice well, you're going to perform better in the game. Most people never plan or prepare for their game. They just hit it running. So what we're going to do is we're going to take you outside of time. We need a moment to just get outside of time where we can relax. But instead of musing about your own thoughts, we're going to introduce you to this field of energy, light, sound, and vibration, which our cells love. and they're all healing frequencies. So what happens is the body then absorbs these frequencies just like a sponge absorbs water. And then once we do that, we can start to use it to anticipate or rehearse our next activities. And in order, we could do with any one of these are really good. Like there's a lot of research about any one of these. What I did was I put them together into one system and actually have science that shows that it works. You know, a lot of these systems, they have some science here and there, like you're talking about binaural beats or isochronic tones. These are two different ones. And if you read the literature, people who like isochronic tones say, oh, binaural beats don't work. And binaural beats, oh, you don't need ice. It's like, no, they all work. They're all really good. It's just, it's like going to the symphony. We could have the string section and that'd be a good thing to listen to. And we can have the horn section and that'd be a good thing to listen to. But why don't we put them together and have a full orchestra? You know, so that's why we call it an orchestra of brainwaves, because we need to keep the brain going. And one thing about our brain, it's much more intelligent than anyone's told us about. You know, I don't know if you ever saw that movie with Rain Man, where Dustin Hoffman says 1,113 or whatever toothpicks. Well, when they fall on the ground, well, we all can do that. Our brain is able to do that but we don't, it's not meaningful for us. So we don't use it. That doesn't mean it's not possible. You know, and so many people are so quick to say, well, that's not possible. I'd rather take a pill. Well, a pill is basically the placebo, which a lot of people might know what that word means. Basically, it means it's an inert substance, but the brain makes it work, you know, and the placebo is now up to 40%. Somebody goes, well, what if it's the placebo? I said, so what? You know, if it's working, but our studies show that 97% of the people get the positive response every time. So that's way above placebo. You know, so the reality is, though, you can think your way out of a change, or you can think your way into a change, or you can just be neutral. In this case, we just want people to relax. Don't give it too much thought. Just let the body do what it does and get the result. The result is, first of all, physiological relaxation. If you can get the body out of its stress state, there's an innate intelligence in the body. The same way, if we cut our elbow when we were a kid and we cried about it, we go into mom or dad, they put a Band-Aid on it, we don't think about it. A few weeks later, it's healed. We don't sit and fret about it. The body's intelligence knew how to coagulate the blood, scab over, and heal. You know, and that's true with most of the physiology of our body, if we're giving it enough time. We don't have that same strategy with our brain because we have thoughts. So we need to realize that no one's perfect, that we're going to have stress. It's all about adaptation. It's all about how can we do better than tomorrow. It's not about perfection. It's about improvement. And if we can get people to have that kind of philosophy about their own mind space, then we probably wouldn't have all the mental disorders we have today. You know, and there's a saying that Buddha said a long time ago. He said, all unhappiness stems from unfavorable comparisons. And I think that's the biggest downfall we have in our world today, is that just because, like I mentioned Tom Brady, people think I'm going to buy this clothing, I'm going to be Tom Brady. Well, I don't think so. You know, you can look like Tom Brady, and you can smell like Tom Brady, but you're not going to perform like Tom Brady. There's only one Tom Brady, you know, but you can perform to your highest level. And I think people need to understand that we have technology now, like yoga and Tai Chi and these things. These are all technologies that are helping us to maximize our body's ability to function in this space and time. And if we use it correctly, the way it was intended, we'll get those incremental changes. And so what we've done is we put these sciences together to make it work. It's actually called Leia Yoga, Union of the Mind. That's really what's going on with the BrainTap.
Okay, so how do you distinguish this from just guided meditation apps or some of these other light and sound machines, as they're called, that are on the market?
Well, most of the light and sound machines were copied after mine. So some of them are good, you know, some aren't. Some will give you headaches because they think it's a flashing light machine. They don't understand that there's a offset. With the BrainTap, you probably noticed this when as you're listening, you think the lights went off, so you open your eyes, but you notice the lights are still going. That's when your brain's balanced. So we know the exact difference in time. If they're balanced, you won't see the light anymore. Most machines don't do that because they don't understand how the brain works. They basically made a bunch of flashing light machines. Now there's some that are good out there. Some are our old machines that we sold in the 90s. They're still being sold, but they don't have the training protocols that we have, the 2000 sessions that are part of our library. But I think that the main difference between this and other apps are usability. With us, our average user uses it 28 times a month. We only have 1% churn on our app. That's unheard of in the meditation space. In fact, people like Headspace and Calm, they're buying their membership because they're leaving so fast. That's a boring process. People listen to that. I mean, even though at first it's kind of novel, but that's old school hypnosis. That's not even meditation. That is like this guy named Dr. Kroger. You could read his books from the 1950s. They're using his same techniques. These are really old technologies that they're using, but they have money. So when you can spend $20 million a month on marketing and you have a $1 billion market cap, you can look like you're something big and bad. But the reality is, but anything done to relax the body, I think is good. I'm not saying that, but they don't have sticking power because people aren't getting the end result they want. You have to have an end result. You have to have something that they want to accomplish. And when we can show, like in our one study we did with NIH, where we showed now it's up to 500 people, but at the time we presented to the National Institute of Health, we did it with 100 people, women 55, 65, no meditation experience. They all had a 37.8% reduction in stress in one session. After 30 days of using it, that became their new baseline. Now they're running around with that much less stress because they trained themselves. Nobody has that. There's no meditation app out there that can do that but us.
Okay, so this gets into the last thing I wanted to ask you, which is what does the actual published science, published research say about the efficacy of your device? And like you just mentioned one, but can you speak to some of these real world results and maybe some of the brainwave measurements that have been done as far as the real world efficacy?
Yeah, well, we have a pilot study that's now in a bigger study now at Seminole College in Florida that was done, and it's written about in a book called Saving Your Brain by Dr. Kelly Miller. He has a chapter in there, BrainTap to the Rescue, because he was working with dementia patients and Alzheimer's patients. And so we had them go to their medical doctors. They all got checked out. They all were diagnosed with dementia. These were not Alzheimer's patients. These were dementia. So it's a little easier for us. And then we had them take the Cambridge Science testing, which is a series of battery of tests that you do online that will give you brain scores. They all tested, they were in dementia. They were in the spectrum of dementia. Everything they did, we measured their brain with something called the WAVI, and we noticed that the frontal lobe was off. It's like as much as 1 volt, which is, your brain won't communicate. And if it doesn't communicate, it'll have what's called neural pruning, means the brain will start disconnecting itself. And that's what happens with dementia and Alzheimer's. So we then took them through a 6-week protocol. They had to use the BrainTap 3 times a day in the morning to wake up a brainwave called SMR. That's between beta and alpha. Sensory motor rhythm is a brainwave that, as we age, that's the one that atrophies. And so that's the one that brings us memories, concentration, and focus. So that was the morning. The afternoon, we did a thing called brain fitness, which was more mental exercises, more deep alpha and the SMR training, but more alpha activity to get them to relax and recover. And then we had them go to sleep with delta. And this is important because when you have a dysregulated brain like they had, and you go to sleep, you can have nightmares and, different things happening, and that doesn't help. So, but at the end of 6 weeks, we sent them back to their doctors. Their doctors were blown away. If you'd have came to me 6 weeks like this, I'd have never diagnosed you with dementia. We measured their brain. We measured the energy output of their brain. After 6 weeks, 49% more neuroplasticity, which means more energy in the brain. The biggest thing was they went from being a delta brain, over 70% of each of their brains was operating in delta. And the unfortunate part is almost everybody out there listening to my voice right now is over 50% delta. Very rarely do we, while they're awake.
In sort of common parlance, that basically means that they're in a sleepy mode. Their brain is not as alert as it should be.
Right. Their brain's trying to reboot. It could be caused by inflammation, probably. and maybe a traumatic brain injury if it was a sport or something like that. This is what the brain does. It wants to reboot, and basically just like an old Mac Microsoft system, it wants to reboot and bring up the systems again, but it can't because we keep stimulating it with coffee, tea, or chocolate or sugar of some way. But anyway, at the end of the study, everything lined up. They were off the dementia scale, but 6 months later, we tested them again. We gave them the equipment after the study. They could use it or not use it. We weren't watching them. They could do whatever. They all kept doing it. They all had it improved even further. They said, there's no way we're going to stop doing this because of the improvement they had. So that's one. We had the other one that I'll talk about. We've had 11 studies that have been published in the last 2 years. And I've had 3 others published with breath that I did with Ames Bhopal to show that you can do this with breath work too. It just takes a lot more time. So I try to prove that you can do it with ancient traditions as well, but modern technology is what people want to do because it's easy. You just press play and do it. But you can do it with breath work and different pranayamas and things like that. But what we did was we took a high school in Michigan, and Dr. Ted Arkefelt was the doctor. Everybody who got a concussion in 2020, which wasn't that many because, of course, remember, it's a COVID year, but every person went through the study. 50% of them got BrainTap at the end of their treatment. So they all got the medical treatment, exactly what you'd get for concussion. They all were returned to play. 1 year from the return to play date, they went back and did neurological testing with them. What we showed was 1 year later, the group, and they didn't use BrainTap between that. They only used BrainTap at the time of their treatment. But 1 year later, they had between 30 and 70% neurological function improvement over the group that didn't use BrainTap 1 year later. So what we're trying to prove is that it's not something that just happens at the time. We're talking about changing the brain for the better going forward in time. Now, what I do know, if somebody's wondering if it wasn't dementia, if you had Alzheimer's, what we're finding with our Alzheimer trainings that we're doing is we need to add more energy. And how we do that is our science officer, Dr. Sadral, who made that, the clothing I was talking about before, he actually wrote the chapter for Dr. Hamblin of Harvard in photobiomodulation in the brain. That's my science officer. So he's got a cap, a skull cap that has lights in it that a lot of people have.
Is this Francisco Gonzalez Lima?
No, this is Francisco Sadral.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, there's another photobiomodulation researcher with the name Francisco that I'm actually in contact with.
So we do a lot. We have partnerships with 4 different universities in Brazil. He now lives in Orlando, but he's still connected with the neuro labs down in Brazil. They actually named the lab the BrainTap Neuro Lab now, just because they're getting such great results. We just finished a study with them where we beat out music, because a lot of people are saying, well, it's just working because of music. Everybody knows music is so great, and it is. But we showed with significance that when you take any music and put BrainTap's algorithm in the background, we make it work better. Mm-hmm. So we proved that out. So we're constantly doing research. We have the research with what happened. The one with brainwaves that was more significant to brainwaves was the girls golf team at Seminole College, which we have if you go to their website, they actually gave us a page on their website because we've helped out the students so much. But these were already elite athletes. We improved their alpha score by 90%.
Wow.
Which is like impossible. But golf, as people who are golfers know, golf's a 5-minute game played in 4.5 hours. So you've got to keep your head straight, right? You can't talk yourself out of a good shot and things like that. So and the side benefit to that was they've been national champions now 3 years in a row.
Wow.
So then that's because, and they have the highest GPA of any other students in the school. So now we're doing a student-wide study to show if we can we did this with Duke University because they're a partner of ours. We have an app called Healthy Duke, and they use it for mental wellness. Especially during COVID, if somebody's having problems, they'd say, download your app. It was called Healthy Duke, but it was BrainTap's app, but they would see the sessions they need to use, and they would do it from their dorm.
Wow.
Even without the headset. You can do this without the headset. You can do it with just the sound if you want.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So as I said earlier, I have to say, I came into this whole thing very skeptical, and now I'm a believer, and, I'm using it every day myself, and I feel the benefits of it. So this is one of those things where my skepticism has been proven wrong through my personal experience. And it's amazing that you also have the real world research and published, third-party research to actually back it up that this truly does work. So let me ask you a question. Are you willing to give my listeners a little discount or some little incentive to purchase the BrainTap?
Sure.
We'll just put a link. We can do it at the energyblueprint.com/BrainTap, all one word, BrainTap, TAP. And it'll be present on that page for people to click the link or get the discount code, whatever we set up.
Yeah, there'll be a link you can get that will give them a free version of the app for 15 days and my book for free.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Dr. Porter, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom. This is really fascinating stuff and amazing in terms of the benefits that people are getting, including myself now. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm loving being the beneficiary of your multi-decades long pursuit of brainwave entrainment.
Okay, thanks for having me. And we're on a mission to better 1 billion brains. So it's great that you're helping me get the word out there. Thank you.
Wonderful. My pleasure. Hey, this is Ari. One more thing before you go. I just want to remind you that you can get a discount on the BrainTap headset by going to theenergyblueprint.com/BrainTap. We will have a link or a discount code there or something that you can use to get a discount while purchasing BrainTap. Again, that's going to give you a better price than I paid for it. I paid full price when I got mine a month ago. Totally worth the value. I've received tremendous benefits from it already. I think it's already given me that much value, and I still have it and get to use it for years to come. So I'm a huge fan of this. And for anybody who struggles with constant underlying anxiety, difficulty sleeping, low levels of energy, low levels of alertness during the day, and who struggles to relax, to get into a state of calm and relaxation, go get yourself a BrainTap headset. This thing really will make a big difference in your life, and I think you will get a huge amount of value from it. So again, go to theenergyblueprint.com/BrainTap. Enjoy. I'll see you soon. Hey there, this is Ari again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you found it valuable, please share it with your friends, share it with your family, help me get the word out there. Also, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to get notifications every time we release a new video or new episode of the podcast. And if you're listening to this, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for supporting my work at the Energy Blueprint. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you in the next